Welcome back to episode 175 of the Irresistible You Podcast. This is Amy. We are going to go through the Irresistible You Podcast Glossary. So, for those of you that have been listening a long time, you know that there are a variety of phrases and words and things that I say here on the podcast. And I thought it would just be a great time to just define those so you can go back to this episode in the future and use it as a reference point. And for those of you that are new and just starting to join us, you will have this information. You'll hear me say these things across the podcast in different episodes. So, what I'm not going to do today, though, I'm not going to get deep into the Irresistible You framework because then it would be a super long episode. And I'm not trying to do that to you guys. We will do that separately. I do mention that throughout the podcast. As you know, the Irresistible You framework is what my program, my course, my coaching, everything is built around that. So I might speak on it a little bit as I'm explaining these terms, but we'll do that another day because that's not today. All right. So, number one, yo-yo diet, body hate, shame cycle. The yo-yo diet, body hate, shame cycle is the I start over on Monday concept, right? I'll start over on Monday. I'm so miserable. I can't believe I've gained all this weight. I'm so miserable in my body. My clothes don't fit. I feel gross. I feel so fat. And I'm going to start over on Monday. So starting today, I'm going to eat everything in sight. I'm going to have the last meal. I'm going to clean out the cabinets, go hit up all my favorite foods, and we'll start fresh on Monday. And you start on Monday because you're trying to go 0 to 100 and you are completely trying to change your life, change your diet, change who you are overnight. And you may be able to do that for a few days. Maybe it's a few weeks, maybe it's a few months even. And then something happens. Something meaning, it could be something small. It could be something big. It could be as simple as someone saying, hey, we're going to go out for drinks tonight after work. Do you want to come with us? And all of a sudden you just lose your shit and you are in like a binge episode where you just can't stop eating, or you're like, or it's not even that. It's the fact that, you went out to eat and you had something that you really hadn't planned for. And now in your mind, you're this failure. See, I told you, you're never going to be able to do it. This is what always happens. And that one time you decide, well, see, I told you I can't do this. It's too hard. It's da, 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 da. I'm always going to be fat. I'm never going to be able to change. And you go back into now the body shaming, right? You fat bitch. I can't believe you. You did it again. How could you let me, like you're telling yourself this, like, how could you let me down? You always fail, blah, blah, blah. Right. And you stay in that shame, that body shame cycle for there's no really defined period of time, because sometimes it might be a day, sometimes it could be a week, sometimes it could be months. It really just depends until when you get fed up the next time. When is the next time that you're going to get fed up and hate yourself so much that you decide to put yourself on this completely unrealistic bullshit diet? And that's the key. This is not the yo-yo diet, body hate, shame cycle is not when you're picking choices for yourself and you're eating in moderation and you're making better choices. This is really when you are still stuck in the diet culture, these bullshit diets that completely deprive you of what you need. They tell you you can't eat certain things. That's really what we're talking about here. So it's that ongoing cycle of I'll start over on Monday, and your Monday might be January 1st. Your Monday might be the start of the week, the start of the month. But you guys that are here that are listening, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So on the podcast, I refer to this as the yo-yo diet, body hate, shame cycle, because it's literally like a circle. Okay. It just keeps spinning. And the only way to get off of it is to decide to take a wrench. I always say, take a wrench, throw it in the wheel, okay? And decide that we're going to stop that wheel from turning. And that comes from doing the work you keep listening, you'll understand, doing the work, deciding to get intentional, deciding to take imperfect action, and deciding that you no longer want to continue on this cycle. So that's the yo-yo diet, body hate, shame cycle. Okay. And the next one that I want to talk about is emotional weight. I use this in every tagline introducing the podcast. And the whole goal of the Irresistible You podcast is to help you lose emotional weight. Emotional weight, what does that mean? It is the invisible weight that we carry that, quite frankly, is heavier than the physical weight. The emotional weight consists of all the trauma, all the stories, all the excuses, all of the experiences and things that people have said or not said, or the emotional weight can be being a caretaker and having to take care of multiple people, and it's just so heavy on your emotions, and it's just that invisible weight that we carry that we haven't dealt with yet, because we can have emotional weight and still be in a healthy, irresistible place because we know what we're doing with it. We know how to manage it. So the emotional weight is something we have to manage and something we have to lose. So, sometimes we're in different seasons where we know we have this emotional weight and we're doing things to manage through it because it's a season of really hard stuff. And then there's losing the emotional weight. So all the stuff that we've been carrying, since the time we were kids or teenagers, that emotional weight. So the way I like to think of that is if you're going through something that's really hard, but it's not necessarily permanent, we can manage that emotional weight, right? And the stuff that has already happened, that's what we need to lose. And that's where I'm going to get into the next term. So the next term is called the inner fat bitch. So the inner fat bitch is your inner voice. And this is the inner voice that definitely has not lost the emotional weight. This is the inner voice that tells you you're a fat piece of shit. This is the inner voice that you hear during that body hate shame cycle, right? That inner voice that's constantly telling you you're not good enough, you're too fat, you will never be able to, fill in the blanks XYZ. You will never be thin, you will never look good. It's just she's an inner fat bitch, right? And we have to address the inner fat bitch in order to lose the emotional weight. Because a good portion of that emotional weight is being driven by the inner fat bitch. Like, she's in charge of this ship and she cannot be in charge any longer, right? So the inner fat bitch is, that negative voice that you hear. And it's definitely loud. And it's loud, and sometimes you don't even realize that you do it because you've been doing it for so long that it has just become what you think is your identity, but it doesn't have to be. It's not your identity. And all of this comes to a place where you can change when you decide, number one, right? And number two, you have to develop like radical self-awareness. You have to develop just this fierce sense of self-awareness so that you can tune in and listen to it. Because I guarantee you, when you're stuck in the cycle, you are not tuned in to what the inner fat bitch is saying. You do everything in your power to avoid what she is saying, right? We don't want to listen to it. As soon as we hear it, we try to distract ourselves by getting busy. We try to distract ourselves with food, right? And that is not the answer. The inner fat bitch, we do need to listen to her, because when we start to listen to her, then we get to make a decision, right? And I can't make a decision in my life if I don't even know something is a true problem. So instead of avoiding that talk, face it head on. that's where we start to do some of the thought work that I talk about, where we, tune into our thoughts and we start to do the work around it to change that, to redirect the conversation, if you will. And that's what I call breaking the rules. So break the rules is it's the first guiding principle in the Irresistible You framework. And when I talk about breaking the rules, it's from the place of changing your thoughts, because we all have these rules, these things that we believe we have to live a certain way, or we have to look a certain way, or weigh a certain amount. And it comes from the media, it comes from experience, it comes from trauma, it comes from things people said to us, things people did not say to us, right? Somewhere along the way, we learned these rules. And having these different rules is what contributes to the emotional weight that you're carrying. Okay. So, let me get to the next. So the next one I would say after inner fat bitch is the fat girl identity. The fat girl identity. So this is, again, when you are not self-aware, when you are not tuned in to the thoughts, you have built this sense of identity, this sense of self that is all around being fat, being overweight. Like, what the hell do you mean? Like, Amy, what are you talking about here? So this is, kind of, it all ties together, right? Because it ties back to the rules, right? You have probably told yourself somewhere along the way, I'm not allowed to wear those types of bathing suits. I'm not allowed to go horseback riding because there's a weight limit. I'm not allowed to be happy because fat people shouldn't be happy. I should only be happy when I get to my goal weight. And you have built this entire identity around being the quote unquote fat girl. And we see this because even when people get to their goal weight or they lose a significant amount of weight, it takes a really long time for the brain to catch up with what it sees in the mirror. And that usually happens a lot when you lose the weight quickly, or you lose the physical weight without doing the work to lose the emotional weight. You look in the mirror or you see a picture that was taken and you don't recognize yourself because your brain is still living in the fat girl identity, right? And so that is something we have to work on changing. And in that fat girl identity, what I find, and I have found, from personal experience as well, is that you don't have unconditional, loving relationship with yourself. And you're afraid to be alone with yourself. You're definitely afraid to be alone with your thoughts because you don't want to hear the inner fat bitch. And your only identity is losing weight, food, because you haven't built other outlets in your life to create fun, to create joy. You keep yourself busy with the yo-yo diet, body hate, shame cycle, right? And the thing I always tell people, and I want you to ask yourself, who would you be if you weren't obsessed about your weight? Because you have probably built it as part of your personality. Who would you be if you could shed that fat girl identity? What's left? Who are you underneath of that? Not who are you when you lose the weight, but who are you right now that you've been hiding from? And you use the weight to hide from your true self. So you're going to have to build a relationship with yourself that's not connected to the fat girl identity. Okay. So I want you to, think about that as you're listening and this stuff is hitting, or, think about how you're doing this in your own life. How are you continuing to create that inner fat girl identity? Okay. All right. So the next word in the glossary that I want to get into, or phrase, I should say, is zombie walking. Zombie walking is kind of what it sounds like. It's when you are so zoned out and in denial of your current circumstances, where you are completely not self aware, because zombies are not aware, right? They're just kind of like walking around looking for their next meal, and they're not enjoying life. They're not living to the fullest. They're not being in the moment whatsoever, right? You go to work on Monday and tell yourself, that was the Monday, right? We're starting over on Monday. You go to work, you're like, I'm going to do this new diet, I'm on it. And by Wednesday, you're at the happy hour, you fall off the wagon, so to speak. And next thing you know, you're like, oh, it's Friday. How did I get here? Or you sit down to eat and realize, like, where did all the food go? Because you're just zoned out. You're like a zombie. And people go years. People go years of zombie walking. They zombie walk through their child's lives. They zombie walk through their careers, their marriages, their entire life. And that's one of the reasons. I mean, there's so many reasons I've created this podcast, but that is one of the biggest things for me too, is that I don't want anyone wasting time anymore. If you're listening to this, this is your wake up call. This is your time to get aware, to get self aware, because I don't want you walking around like a zombie and then waking up in 10 years and going, where did it go? Right? I want you to be like, I know where it went. It went to, we did this and we did that, and I've accomplished this. And it's just like, wake up, because in order for you to, step into what we call being irresistible you, in order for you to do that, you have to stop zombie walking. You have to do that in order to hear the inner fat bitch, in order to change the conversation that you're having and the relationship that you have with yourself. We have to stop zombie walking, because when we're doing that, we're not tuned in. And zombie walking is also what leads to the weight gain, because you're so in denial and so zoned out. And it's that moment where, you wake up and you go to, like, it's, and I use this as my point of reference. You wake up one day and all of a sudden it's like spring, right? We have those days where it's already hot outside, spring is here, and you go to put on clothes for the weather, the warmer weather, and you realize, like, they don't fit. And you're like, oh my God, how did I get here? Here we go again, you fat bitch. I can't believe this. I can't believe you gained all this weight. What were you thinking? Well, you weren't. You were zoned out, right? You were in that zombie walking phase so that you couldn't be self-aware, right? And that moment, I kind of think of that as like the part in the body shaming cycle where you're not trying actively to lose weight. You're not being focused on your food. You're not paying attention to your choices. You're eating like a zombie. And then you wonder, like, how did I get here? Well, we know how you got here. Like, it's not rocket science. And we act like, this is the thing, is that we act like we were taken over by real zombies and we had no control over the situation. And that goes, and that kind of stuff right there, guys, I'm telling you, it all connects, because we have control over what goes in our mouth. If anything, that's one of the few things in our life that we have control over. But we want to act like victims. We want to have a pity party about our weight loss, our weight gain, and then wonder, how the hell did we get here again? It's not hard. Like, it's not hard to connect the dots, is what I'm saying. But we aren't able to connect the dots when we are in that zombie mode and choosing to not be aware. Then how many times when you gained the weight, was it because you were in denial? You were just like zombie walking around, zombie eating. And next thing you know, it's like, oh my God, how did I get here? Like, oh, I'm so surprised. It's like, come on. What has worked for me is being self-aware and knowing and listening to my body and knowing when enough is enough and knowing like, oh shit, like, okay, we need to get it together here. Like, you know what I mean? And so zombie walking, yeah, it's a whole thing. And we talk about all of these concepts on here. And so let's get into the next one. What's next in my list? Okay. So, oh, this is one of my favorites, the wet blanket. The wet blanket of misery. How many of you know what I'm talking about? The wet blanket is an analogy that I use because here's the thing, right? You wake up from zombie walking, you look in the mirror, nothing fits. You realize, holy shit, I have done it again. Like, girl, I have done it again. I've put on the weight. Here we go again with the same bullshit. And the inner fat bitch starts doing her thing. Look at you, you fat bitch, and starts pointing out the rolls and the cellulite and, pointing to everything and just ripping yourself apart, right? And then you're like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Like, I just got to get this weight off. I can't believe I did this again. And you, out of desperation, I call this, there's another term actually, desperate dieting. You go on a desperate diet and start the yo-yo diet, body hate, shame cycle all over again. Now, there comes a point in all of that where you want to change so bad, right? But yet your actions are not in alignment with what you really tell yourself that you want. And you keep thinking, you think to yourself, oh my God, like losing weight is the only thing, like the one thing that I want more than anything else in the world. And I can't do it. I can't hold myself accountable. Why is it that I can succeed in every other area of my life or kill my goals no matter what whatever goal I set for myself, I go out here and I kill it. But when it comes to losing the weight, it's not happening. What is wrong with me? Right? And this is where the wet blanket comes because you are wearing this invisible wet blanket. So what does that mean? So the wet blanket, imagine yourself on the couch watching TV and you want your blanket, your big cozy comforter or your favorite blanket that you use on the couch, and it's in the dryer and it's not all the way dry. So it's very damp. And for some reason, you decide, well, it's okay. I'll just put it on. And you lay down on the couch and you have this wet, damp blanket. Okay. And it's miserable. Like the longer you lay there, it feels awful. It's cold, it's wet. And then something starts to happen is that the longer you lay there, your body starts to acclimate to the wetness. And if you just stay really, really still, you don't feel the chills as much. You don't feel that cold air. The more you wrap the wet blanket around you, now you're not feeling the cold air because now the air feels cold because you're wet, even though it's not cold. That air hits your skin and you wrap yourself around it so that you're no longer feeling that anymore. And that wet blanket is still miserable. But because you have acclimated to it, it's becoming comfortable. It's like familiar misery, right? And being in a body that you hate, being in a body that you wish you could rip off, but yet you're not doing what you need to do in order to make changes to love yourself. It's because you're wearing this wet blanket that you don't want to rip off. And that goes back to the question, well, why can't I do it? What's wrong with me? If I want this, then why am I not doing it? Well, it's because when you take the wet blanket off, it's not comfortable. It's like, yeah, but I'm already miserable. Yeah, you're miserable right now because you're wearing a wet blanket and you're going to feel some pain. You're going to feel some discomfort when you decide to take it off, because what happens, right? now that you take the blanket off of you, your skin is damp. The air is hitting your skin, so it's making you feel cold. It's making you feel miserable. And if you just stay in the pain for a minute, if you just stay in the misery for a minute and acknowledge it and recognize it and do something about it, well, guess what? It goes away. And that brief amount of time that it feels miserable and cold without your wet blanket, you have now got to the other side where you're warm again and you're dry. And now you get to do other things because you're no longer laying your ass under the wet blanket. So that wet blanket is your familiarity, your comfort with being uncomfortable right now. Because something about having the fat girl identity is comforting to you. There's something familiar about it. And change, this whole thing, if you haven't gotten the metaphor yet, it's about change. And change is really, really hard. Even when we say we want it, it's hard to change years and years and years of inner fat bitch talk, negative thinking, beating yourself up, all of these things, using food as comfort. It is hard to change that. And so what you've been trying to do is you try to change that overnight. I'll start over on Monday. Here's a news flash. You're the same fucking person on Monday that you were yesterday. And then you expect to go 0 to 100 with your bullshit keto, grapefruit, stupid ass diets. You expect to stick with that. And then when it doesn't work, you call yourself a fat piece of shit. And to punish yourself, you eat and eat and eat some more. So now we have another 5 or 10 pounds that we've added on to our goal. That is what keeps happening. That is the wet blanket. Yes. I think of, okay, when I take the wet blanket off in this analogy, when I've been, had a huge weight gain, I'm feeling so miserable, none of my clothes fit, but I'm in denial. And I now decided enough is enough, right? That initial moment where you put the running shoes on or the walking shoes and you go out. I remember doing this years ago. I mean, multiple times, honestly, years ago, though, where I put everything on to go work out, go for a walk, and everything just feels hard. Walking to the end of the street felt hard. The shoes are even tight. The hat on my head, workout hat, is tight. And when you start to feel that discomfort of everything not fitting, everything's tight, everything's jiggling all around while you're trying to walk, it's hard to bend over. There's this part of you that wants to just say, fuck this. Fuck this. I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore. It's too hard. I'm going to just slither back under my wet blanket and be the miserable, person that I am. And you give up. But if you just stuck with it, think about if you just stayed, take that blanket off and you stay damp and you stay cold for a little while, eventually you're going to get warm. And if you just stick with making the best choices, talking better to yourself, doing what you say you're going to do, keeping commitments to yourself, eventually that is going to feel 1,000 times better than this stupid ass wet blanket. And then that new version of yourself becomes your new reality so that you're no longer willing to ever put a wet blanket on ever again. Because why would anyone want to do that? And you can't blame yourself because you didn't have the self-awareness. And now you have this, I call it radical self-awareness, right? You have this radical self-awareness of who you are, who you want to become, and what you're working towards, that you're not willing to allow yourself to be under the wet blanket again. But you can't do that until you recognize the problem. You just can't. There's no way for you to do that without recognizing it's a problem first. Next phrase in our glossary, which is waiting for the wait. Waiting for the wait is the concept of you continuing to tell yourself, someday when I reach my goal weight, I'm going to dress like so and so. Someday when I reach my goal weight, I'm going to wear a two-piece bathing suit. Someday when I reach my goal weight, I'm going to also go on the rides at the theme park or at Disney World with my kids. Someday when I think I look better, I'll get in the picture. Someday when I lose the weight, then I'll go ahead and decide to get pregnant. Someday when okay, you get where I'm going? So this is called waiting for the wait. It is literally you putting your life, right? Putting your life on hold because you don't believe that you deserve these things because of your size. And so you keep telling yourself the same lies that you don't deserve it, you're too big, you're too fat, you're too overweight, and that once you lose the weight, then you'll get a new wardrobe. Then you'll go on the dating app. Then you'll go, get that promotion at work or start that business or whatever it is. Because let me tell you this. When you are carrying emotional weight and you are putting your life on hold and waiting in the sidelines because you don't think you are good enough, your life is literally passing you by and you don't get the time back. So I want you to ask yourself right now, how much time am I willing to waste? Because that's what it is. How much time am I willing to waste to continue waiting for the wait? And another big reason why we have to work on waiting for the wait now, or we don't wait for the wait in order to, everything that I shared with you already. We're not waiting for the wait to fully come off. Like, here's the irony in all of it, guys. You have been taught, through society, through culture, diet culture, through those things, you have been taught that if you could just get to your goal weight and be thin, well, then you get to have your dream life. Then you get to wear the sexy clothes. Then you get to get your hair done. Then you get to change your style. Then you get to go on more vacations because you think somehow your personality is going to just flip because, oh my God, you're in a size 8. And because I'm in a size 8, I am all of a sudden this outgoing, like life of the party. And that's not how this works. We've all been taught backwards. And the irony in all of this is that if you want the physical weight to come off, you have to do all of those things now. You need to build confidence now. You need to get the wet blanket off now. You need to stop the zombie walking now. You have got to change and drop the fat girl identity now. We got to redirect that inner fat bitch talk now. We have to stop desperate dieting now. We have to lose the emotional weight now. Not 20 pounds from now, not 100 pounds from now. And the irony in all of it is when you start to do that work, the weight becomes the last thing on your mind because the weight starts to come down. You stop using food as your coping mechanism. You stop using Netflix as your hobby. You start living your fucking life. You start getting outside and enjoying nature and like being grateful and appreciating all the things in life that are so beautiful that when you are stuck in your selfish, fat, inner fat bitch cycle, you don't care about because you didn't have any space to care about it. And when you start to do all those things, then it no longer feels like, oh my God, I have to go on this diet and it's going to be painful and I don't want to do it and I can't have anything. No, you learn how to live your damn life and also, enjoy things. And that's how the weight starts to come off because now you have a new identity, right? You have a bigger vision for yourself. You have other outlets to feed your soul other than food. You learn how to talk differently to yourself. You learn how to redirect your thoughts. You learn that those stupid rules that some of them you probably gathered in 17 magazine or Cosmo that told you if you're a size 12 and up, you should never wear stripes, or those stupid ass rules that tell you after age 40, you shouldn't have hair, this length or whatever. You start to realize those aren't real rules. You are in control of those things. You don't have to follow those rules. You get to write your own rules. And so you want to be doing these things as you transition down the scale so that once you get to your goal, you just get to your goal and you're already who you wanted to be. You're just in a smaller size. And then you get to reap the physical benefits, right? The physical health benefits that come with losing the weight. But that is why you cannot keep the weight off if you have never tried to lose the emotional weight in the first place. And then you wonder why you can't stick with something because you're trying to do things that are not realistic with your life. And I always tell everyone, if you're on this weight loss journey, throw your timelines out the freaking window because I would much rather lose the weight for the last time and it take me 5 years versus gaining and losing the same 50 pounds, 5 or 10 times in 5 years. Pick your poison. Which would you rather do? Because I would much rather be working on myself and knowing this weight is never coming back because I'm now doing the things I should, the things that are going to keep it from happening because we act like it just attacks us. Like the weight just comes and finds us and it attacks us and we have no idea where it came from. And, you're in control of that. You cannot control certain circumstances, but we get to control how we handle those, how we speak to ourselves. And you can't do any of that until you decide that you're going to make a change. And you don't have to have all the answers right now. You don't have to do things perfectly. Matter of fact, trying to do things perfectly is why you keep throwing yourself in that cycle. It's not about perfection. And I would much rather learn how to think differently or how to do things differently and know if I don't want this weight to come back, guess what? It doesn't have to come back. Like, think about that. That is when that hit me a while ago, like years ago, that was something that was so empowering to me that was like, oh, I'm not a victim. This is not a pity party. And if I decide that I don't want to gain the weight back, that's my decision. It's not something that just happens overnight, right? And when we start to dissect our behavior, our thoughts, our actions, then we get to make choices. And that is where like the Irresistible You framework comes into place. And I will do another episode where I dive into that a little bit more and explain some of those concepts to you guys so that you can understand, knowing what we know now, how that framework is going to help us to move out of this yo-yo diet, body hate, shame cycle, to stop waiting for the weight and to create the life that we crave. And you get to become the version of yourself that you deserve to be. Whew, it's a lot. That's a lot of stuff. So I'm sure there's questions and we can answer those inside of the Irresistible You Facebook group, the podcast discussion group. If I missed a term, guys, hold me accountable. Let me know. I may have to do a part 2 eventually to the glossary, because as time goes on, I know I add things to it. But let's just recap real quick. I talked about the yo-yo diet, body hate shame cycle. We talked a little bit about desperate dieting. We talked about emotional weight, radical self-awareness, breaking the rules, the inner fat bitch, the fat girl identity, zombie walking, the wet blanket, and waiting for the wait. So if you have any questions, again, you can reach out through the Facebook group to ask those or post any comments that you have around the episode there. And I will be back again next week with a new episode. And I'm going to wrap things up here. So until next time, guys, thank you so much for listening. Head over to Apple Podcasts, leave a rating and review if this has been helpful to you. And until next time, stay irresistible. Bye, guys.